Hello and welcome back to the BBC. This is Charlie Slater reporting. Oh yeah, Mr. Bonner. Mr. Lucius Bonner was found today, flushing over 5 apartment police. Recovered the bills and traced it back to him. So, Mr. Bonner is expected to go on trial tomorrow at 8:59 a.m. In a surprise move this morning, the district attorney cancelled the trial that was set for Mr. Lucius Bonner. Mr. Bonner was accused of flushing over $5 million worth of banknotes down his toilet.
In the Bonner case, many knowledge issues arise. What is a knowledge issue, you ask? Well, a knowledge issue is simply anything that affects our knowing. In the Bonner case, the main knowledge issue is uncertainty. The reporters and the prosecutors are accusing him without sufficient evidence to prove for 100% certainty that he actually committed the crimes. Therefore, there is uncertainty because no one can know that he actually did commit the crimes, and so it's uncertain to us.
Mr. Bonner, thank you for being with me here today.
My pleasure.
In the past, you have been accused of doing some, I have to say, quite terrible things. You were once called, and I quote, the drug kingpin of Vancouver, Washington. In addition to flooding the streets with illicit drugs, you stole homework from innocent international baccalaureate students, which we would call the largest paper heist in history. And just last week, the Newark Police Department found over 1,000 $100 bills clogged in the sewer main. Police say they've traced the bills back to you. Now, what do you have to say to yourself? Given your past, how can you be innocent of these new charges?
The reporter just used an area of knowledge to come to his assumption. What is an area of knowledge, you're asking? Well, simply, it's anywhere you derive knowledge from. There are 6 main areas of knowledge. In this case, the reporter used history as an area of knowledge. He looked at Lucius Bonner's history, and from it, he could derive the fact that he was a gangster and he was getting all these illegal funds. So he automatically associated him as being a criminal. He used history in order to gain the knowledge that he was a bad guy and he committed the crime. Excuse me for a second. It's cold in here. That's better. But the reporter made the mistake of committing a logic fallacy. What's a logic fallacy? Well, a logic fallacy is basically fallacious reasoning. But to simplify it, you have to use incorrect reasoning, you may ask. So, in this case, he used the ad hominem logic fallacy. What's ad hominem? Well, simply, he looked at the Lucius Bonner's history and went, oh, you're a drug dealer, therefore you're a criminal. When the fact that he was a criminal has nothing to do with did you commit the crime or not. You can't submit into evidence, look, Lucius Bonner is a criminal, therefore it proves he committed the crime. That doesn't make sense. Consider this alternate explanation. You look at someone promoting gay rights and you go, actually, you're a homosexual. Therefore, your argument does not hold any weight. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, if I actually did what I'm accused of done, it's certainly not the worst thing I've ever done.
Well, what would be the worst?
I'd say it'd be the second time I torched the orphanage.
Touché, sir. Still, how can you deny the loss of billions of dollars of investors' money when you were found to be running what would be called a Ponzi scheme in essence?
Look, as you can clearly see here, by taking the inverse hyperbolic cosine in a Taylor-Maclaurin series, add to that the tangent inverse with the secant squared derivative, it's simply impossible for me to have stolen any of that money.
No matter how ridiculous that might have sounded, it is yet another example of how TOK can be applied to real-life situations. Lucius Bonner used math as an area of knowledge. Recall that an area of knowledge is a way you get information. You can look at charts, graphs, and all that statistical evidence, and from there, you acquire your knowledge. All Lucius Bonner did was simply look at his proofs, his math, and then he went, this is how I could not have committed the crime.
Well, I guess you can't argue with math, and I really can't see anything wrong with the argument, so therefore you must be a perfectly upstanding individual.
I try to be an upstanding citizen. An example to children's stuff. A great American hero like Lee Harvey Oswald or John Wilkes Booth.
As you can see, the reporter just used perception as a way of knowing. Now what is a way of knowing? Simply, it is how you can acquire the knowledge. Therefore, a way of knowing. Pretty simple. Look, take reason for example. It's one of the 4 ways of knowing. Every day you use it. You sit down in your class, you sit down in the same chair, you tell yourself, oh, it didn't break on me yesterday, so you reason out that it won't break on you the next time you sit down. It happens millions of times a day and you don't even think about it. As I said, the reporter used perception, meaning he, in his perception, the way he perceived it, Lucius Bonner was innocent.
Okay, but Mr. Bonner, if you didn't steal the money, where did it go? You were the only person who had any access to it. Therefore, you were the only person who could have stolen it. I mean, last year, your bank account showed an increase of over $5 million. And you only make $150,000 a year. I don't understand the math in that.
What the reporter just did was use reason as a way of knowing. As described earlier, way of knowing, just the way he attained his knowledge. He looked at the missing money and Lucius Bonner's bank statements and reasoned out, oh, therefore, there's missing money, his money went up, it doesn't go with his bank records, he must have taken the money.
If I stole the money, I'm not saying that I did. My reason for it would have been thus. I mean, by stealing that money, they couldn't use it to buy fatty fast food. And because they didn't buy that, they didn't get those terrible fatty buildups in their arteries, and so they would have a longer lifespan. And, you know, if I had stolen that money, and by stolen I mean borrowed and given to other investors, they should really be thanking me.
You could tell by the face on the reporter that that was absolutely ridiculous. But what made it so ridiculous? Well, Lucius Bonner was using a logic fallacy. Again, anything which is basically wrong logic. And so the logic fallacy used was the slippery slope. As you can guess, it says one thing is going to lead to another, and therefore this will happen, which becomes preposterous. Here's an example. If you give a mouse a cookie, everyone knows that book. If you give a mouse a cookie, then he'll ask for another cookie. And if you give a mouse that cookie, then he'll want some milk. And if you give a mouse some milk, he's going to develop a taste for human blood. And if it develops a taste for human blood, it's going to become a vampire. And if it becomes a vampire, it's going to mate with other little mouses that have had cookies, milk, and blood. And they're going to create a whole race of vampires, and eventually the world's going to die. Therefore, I can't give a mouse a cookie. You can see how ridiculous it is.
Well, sir, with the arguments you've presented me, you've convinced me that you aren't really responsible for the theft of money. Well, thank you for taking the time out of your day to speak to us.
My pleasure.